What is up, everyone? We're so glad that you've joined us. My goodness, it has been a while since we have recorded a podcast. We won't go
I don't
through
even
all
know
the
how long.
reasons. I know it's been a while, like definitely over a month, maybe more like two. Ugh, been
Okay.
a while. Amber and I be like, hey, we need to shoot a podcast. And it's either myself or Amber or electricity or Wi-Fi, or for me, we
Something is
just went,
lacking.
we just had a hurricane, so that was crazy.
Hmm.
So it just kept getting pushed off, but finally we're like, we're gonna do the thing. We're gonna record. So glad you guys could join us today. We're continuing our series. Actually, it's like almost starting again. It's
Yeah.
going to be episode 2 on muscle hypertrophy, which is just a fancy word for talking about muscle growth. And this is a really important subject, not only for a lot of men might gravitate towards, like, I want to build muscle. Women, I think, are more starting to become more and more knowledgeable of like, hey, I need to build muscle. I need to be
Right.
strong. There's still a little bit of in culture like, well, I'm afraid if I lift weights, I'm going to get all bulky. And they just
Right.
equate building muscle with bulky, but that's just not how it typically works out. There's anomalies. Amber, do you want to speak to that real quick before we jump into how to build muscle? Maybe talk to that phenomenon of like how women think about this, and
Hmm.
how would you talk to them to say this is exactly what you need for your own health and strength?
Yeah. So I've been doing this for about 2 years and working with probably 85% of my clientele is female. So this is a conversation we have regularly. And I think a big part of it, it's very generational. I think if you are in your mid 30s and above, the thought of weightlifting and heavy weightlifting specifically is automatically, I'm going to look like a man. Because generationally, we were taught that women should be super thin and petite and tiny and feminine and all of these things. And so we think we equate muscle with like men. However, John, you kind of already spoke to it, but the younger generation, I would say definitely like women in their younger 30s and below, definitely are getting like a really good grasp. And I think social media is playing a big part into this of muscle does not make you manly. Muscle looks great. Muscle gives you shape and curves. And ultimately, what people don't necessarily talk about, but is a scientific reality, is muscle creates longevity and like quality of life, right? So quality of
Mm-hmm.
life, long term, super, super crucial. Um, so women, like, we know that often like you want that slim down toned look. I hate the word toned, but because it is such a big word. Like if you hashtag toned on Instagram,
It's pretty big, huh?
it's pretty big. But that's what women want. But in order to get that look toned, you have to have muscle. You have to
Yes.
have shape to your body. Otherwise, I'm sure you all have seen it, but like there's women who walk around with very, very lean arms, very lean legs with no shape. They're very straight. Whereas that toned look is what gives you that more the curvature and the muscular difference and things like that. Just because you lift heavier or can learn about weightlifting and building muscle does not mean you're going to look like John.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
So I'm just saying. So I think creating that distinct difference and bringing education to that and clarification to that is super crucial so that, okay, women, now you can stay in this podcast and learn, hey, I know what I want to look like and I know that I need to follow these steps to get there.
Yeah, to segue a little bit,
Yeah.
even guys will say, well, I'm not really trying to look like a bodybuilder. And I just like want to
Yeah.
say, don't worry about it. Like you
Yeah.
you won't. I mean, there are a
You
few.
have to really, really train specifically to look like that.
No, you're absolutely right. And
Yeah.
like you were, I have some good size on me, but I am not even close to the size of competing bodybuilders. Like
I
it's
got a
like,
question for you. Can you
yes.
fit your bicep in the screen?
Yeah, but I'll try to get the right angle. But even
Exactly.
that, I mean, but even that, like, compared to like some of these guys that are competing, and there are definitely some natural bodybuilders. But if you look at those guys,
Yeah.
especially once they lean up, I mean, they're like, wow, they're really tiny. Now, if you got up close to them in person, you're like, wow, this person's jacked. But
Right.
compared to like Mr. Olympia or even like the open bodybuilding, those guys are like the mass monsters. It's just not going to happen for you to get to that size. There
Right.
are a few people I think that are like genetically like just gifted to be actually pretty big. They may not be on steroids, but a lot of the guys there are taking PDs. There's no hate on them. They're doing a ton of hard work, and
Right.
we applaud them for that. But just everyday people trying to get in the best shape of their life, putting on good muscle mass. You can
Yeah.
put on a lot of mass, but it takes a lot of work. And I guarantee
Right.
you, if you just work out like a bodybuilder does, get good nutrition, you're going to like the way you look. You're going to put on some good lean muscle. And we talked
Yeah.
our last episode, we said the first thing to show the most change to your body's composition is actually losing fat. But
Right.
then once the fat's peeled away, you're like, oh, I see some areas that I need to bring up. Actually, like maybe you have a lot of fat on your arms, you didn't realize it. So when you lost weight, you're like, oh, my arms aren't actually as big as I thought they were. Or
Right.
your back or your shoulders, so on and so forth. So what we want to do is kind of go from there and say, okay, now how do you actually go about building this physique, building muscle? And we kind of made some distinguishing between training for like different modalities. Like if you train for strength, so there's muscle strength, there's muscular endurance, and then there's
Hmm.
muscular hypertrophy. And just
Yeah.
to clarify, that's what we're talking about, is building muscle.
Yep.
Do you get stronger muscles with just building bigger muscles? Yeah, you do, because when you apply progressive overload, you're going to get stronger. But
Right.
your goal isn't necessarily like, what's my 1 rep max. You're not
Right.
training in that way when you're training for hypertrophy, and that's really not even optimal for hypertrophy. Like if you went into the gym and all you went for was like maxing out on bench and deadlift and squat, you're going to gain some muscle. Sure. Are you optimizing muscle hypertrophy? No, you're not. You're
Right.
just getting neurologically stronger. And so we want to apply these terms like maybe you hear people talk about it like on YouTube or Instagram. They'll talk about intensity versus volume, and they'll talk about frequency, and they'll talk about sets
Yeah.
and loads. And maybe you're lost in all of the
I would
mess.
say it gets so jumbled and there's so many terms.
Yeah. And then you hear people like, it's not about your volume, it's about intensity. Next video, a guy that's equally jacked. It's not about intensity, it's about volume. You're like, what? What is it?
Which
And
one is right? Yeah.
then what gets real tricky is one person's actually citing a study, and the other person is also citing a study. So
Hmm.
it's not like they aren't reading the scientific literature, and so it can get really confusing. So what we want to do today, hopefully, is to cut through all of the noise
Yeah.
and to present to you um, what we can see as, and not just by the literature, but by experience as coaches, what is the best approach for getting at muscle building, and also
Yeah.
help kind of clear up some of these terms. So we're going to talk about 3 things today, and then as the weeks go on, we'll be hitting on some of these other things that will help you learn how to train better for hypertrophy. We're going to talk about intensity, volume, and frequency. So the first one is this really fun word, intensity.
Yeah.
So I want to clarify what intensity is, and Amber, feel free to chime in here,
Yeah.
between how power lifters, people that are trying to get as crazy strong as possible, how they use the word intensity, and then also how like more of like a bodybuilder or somebody who's focusing on building muscle. So there's intensity of load, and that actually is approximation to your 1 rep max.
Right.
So
So there's like math involved in that.
right. So if
Hmm.
80% of my 1 rep max is less intense than my 95% of my 1 rep max. So the closer I get to that 1 rep max, I'm not necessarily trying to go to failure,
Right.
um, but I'm just trying to get as close as I can. And obviously, the heavier the load, the more intense it's going to be. It's
Right.
pretty simple.
Yeah.
For hypertrophy, though, for training for that, you're actually trying to, it's what we call intensity of effort. And it's
Yeah.
where you're actually trying to get as close as you can to failure. And one of the ways that the scientific literature talks about it, they'll talk about, hey, I was 2 RIR, or reps in reserve. And you've heard us talk about
Yes.
this in the past if you followed us on this podcast. And when I'm training clients, my goal is to set up their programming in such a way that they increase their intensity from week to week. So they may start off like at 3 to 2 RIR, reps in reserve, starting off. So, and that's actually still pretty hard. And
Yes.
a lot of people actually,
I generally train about 2 to 3 reps RIR. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And there is some debate here, but basically, if you hit between 4 and all the way to momentary muscular failure, you're going to gain muscle. But
Yeah.
as you progress, you want to kind of, and this is the way that I do it. There's more than one right way here, but I try to progress that. So if, let's say they go from 3 RIR, a couple weeks later, I want them to be at more at 2, and then a couple weeks later at 1. And then as they hit peak week, which might be 2 weeks, I tried to say, hey, try to go to absolute failure. And then
Yeah.
sometimes if it's a 2 week peak, on that last week, we'll pull out intensity principles that helps them to move beyond like just regular muscular failure. And I'll touch on that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is, so when we're talking about building muscle, like what is the fundamental? The fundamental really is you're getting into that window, you're working out hard enough with obviously good technique. You're working
Mm-hmm.
out hard enough to get you in that window of 4 RIR all the way up to muscular failure. If you hit that and you just have a natural progression, we'll talk about progressive overload in a couple of weeks a little bit more in detail. But if you just work a little bit harder than you did last time, non-scientific language there, it's pretty simple. Work a little bit
Yeah.
harder than you did last time. Maybe it's an extra rep, a little bit more weight. The
Right.
intensity is going to build. Therefore, you are actually going to be building muscle. Anything that you want to add there that would clarify for the audience, Amber?
Yeah. So I think one question that I get often, and I think we should try and explain a little bit more into this like intensity of effort. So John, when you think of intensity of effort, yes, we're talking about reps in reserve, like how many more you could do before you would hit that, like, I can't move my arm. I cannot do that bicep curl. That would be failure, right? But this intensity of effort, and when we're doing the movement, what does that feel like, right? Because I often come across people who don't know what that feels like, and they feel like they're putting a lot of effort in, but they're not gaining strength, or they're not moving forward in how much they can lift and things like that, which tells us in general they're not lifting heavy enough or frequently enough, right?
Yes.
Things like that. But they don't know how they're supposed to feel. Like, what are the physiological feeling of hitting that like close to end point failure, which we'll touch on in a second. But that reps in reserve, what are they supposed to be feeling those last few reps? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Let's try to explain to them, like, if they had a trainer, what we would be looking for.
Yeah. So imagine like you're laying on a bench and you're doing like dumbbell press, and you're starting to feel like you got the first couple of reps, they're moving smoothly, but now you start to notice like, oh, the weight, I'm starting to feel a little bit of a burn and in the target muscle, and I'm not moving the weight as fast as I was.
Mm-hmm.
So you know you're starting to approach, I don't know how many more reps I can do. Now, the more you train, the more you realize I actually can push through this slowing down, and I actually can get like even a deeper level of failure. So a beginner level of failure versus an advanced is probably going to look a little different just because they've trained
Right.
for years. They know their body's limits, so on and so forth. Also, if you're doing an exercise like dumbbells, you feel a little bit safer. So if you're doing like
Sure.
a barbell by yourself, you probably don't actually ever really want to go to absolute failure unless you have a spotter or
Right.
safety rack. But good news, remember, if you get in that window, you're still going to build muscle, like between that
Yeah.
4 reps of reserve to failure. But some of these exercises, like a machine or like dumbbells, you can keep pushing it, and if you lowered the weight. Dumbbells might be still a little bit scary if you like try to drop the weight. That can be kind of awkward. But
Yeah.
particularly with a machine, you can just drop it, and you're fine. You're not going to really hurt yourself. But you're going to feel that burn. Weight's going to slow down, and you're going to like. There's this level of burn. Like you're like, oh my goodness, this hurts so much, and you probably can feel like, I think I have one more in me, and you
Yeah.
might actually have two. And the more you work
Right.
out, you'll realize like, oh, I actually had two. This is why having a spotter and playing
You'll
around with it will be
discover
really
what
good.
your endpoint really is.
What's interesting with just training different people, and this is just people's just their makeup. Some guys they'll be able to they'll go fast with reps, and all of a sudden their power cuts out really fast. Their
Yeah.
fast twitch muscles have failed,
Yeah.
and they can't even do another rep. Like their last rep was fast, and then they're like, oh, I can't do it anymore. Then there's
Yeah.
other people who just tend to have a lot of slow twitch muscle, so that when they're feeling the burn, but for some reason they could just keep pushing through, and they're like getting another rep, and it's like
I
incredibly
know people
slow.
like that. I
It's
I
like,
know people who can pump out like 50 chest presses,
mm-hmm,
no, like control, no problem. And I'm
yes,
like, all right. And it's not like a weight thing. They have a lot of muscle that just like it takes a while to fatigue. And that is actually a really good point that I want to hit on real quick since we're talking about intensity. Is let's talk about doing fast reps versus doing controlled reps real quick, because I think that this is super crucial, and it's something that I see all the time in the gym. And is there a benefit to doing fast reps versus controlled repetitions? And I'm not talking about slow repetitions, but you and I will often train our clients to do like eccentric or concentric movement in a 3-2-1 movement pattern, because what it does is it controls and it slows them down. And I know for me, I teach my people how to do that, because when you push through a workout and you're doing the squats, you're doing these squats as fast as possible, you're opening yourself up to two things. One, not lifting as heavy as you really could, so you're not taking your muscle to optimal work. Two, you're also opening up yourself to injury because you're moving too quickly. Actually, I guess there's three things. You are not, I guess that would kind of tie together with the first thing. I was gonna say you're not doing the work that you could be doing, and so you're not going to get the results that you want. So it could tie together. But what are your thoughts on like the controlled movements versus these fast, like, because we've both seen it at
yeah,
the gym, like these
yeah.
people just pumping out these exercises or these at home workouts that are just like fast, 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 like move quickly. And I'm like, if you move slower, you would make more progress.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So
Yeah.
the speed of the rep um, can make a difference. Now, I want to make a distinguish between like a faster pace, but still controlled,
Yeah.
can be totally fine.
Right.
But a lot of times, especially with beginners,
That's very
um,
rare though. Yeah.
yeah, when they're doing a faster pace, they start to lose control, and
Right.
so like you're I've played around with rep ranges with clients, but just like generally it could be like you were talking about like a 3 second eccentric part, maybe even a pause, not always necessary, but
Right.
then like, and then when the concentric part, since they're going against the weight, you can almost say like explode to the top. That's totally fine. But if it's heavy enough, they're not really going to explode. They're just
Right.
trying to ignite all the muscle fibers as fast as possible, which can be hypertrophic. So that's good. But my goodness, when somebody goes super fast into a repetition where they basically blow through the eccentric really fast, they're missing out on all of that hypertrophy. Now, I've read several things that conflict. There's still some studies out on this, but they basically have parsed out that 55% of hypertrophy comes from the eccentric, and 45% or so comes from the concentric part of it. That
Yeah.
used to
So
be
both are
believed.
crucial.
Yeah, both. A lot of times it was like, man, if you get a really good flex or squeeze of the muscle, you're going to build muscle. But it's actually more hypertrophic to get that stretch, and you want to get both.
Yeah.
But if you just like you think about squats, like a dive bomber squat, you know what I'm talking about, where people just like drop down and they almost get that bounce. They're
Yeah.
missing out on all this mechanical tension, and they're probably not missing out all of it, but like
A
55%.
good bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but just like controlling that all the way down, you're feeling the muscles kind of pull apart in a good way. You're feeling that tension build. And then when you're going from the bottom position of a squat going up, it's not like a bounce, but you're flexing the muscles and going back up. Oh my goodness. You're engaging the muscles in the way that they should. That's going to build muscle. It would be better to do fewer reps and get that mechanical tension all the way down and up than to get like, oh man, look how many reps I did. But actually, you just kind of used momentum to get those.
Right.
That's really cool. That might like get someone like looking at the gym, like your gym crush, but probably actually not. Um, what's actually way more impressive to me as a coach is when I see somebody do, moderate level of lifting. Like if I see somebody doing, let's say, 225 on bench press, but
Hmm.
they're really controlled, and
Yeah.
they like they execute the technique really well,
Yeah.
controlled eccentric pause, and then flexing all the way through the top. That's more impressive to me than somebody throwing 315 on and bouncing it off their chest. Okay,
Yeah.
it's just not going to. Matter of fact, over time, a person benching 225 will have a bigger chest than somebody doing 315 if he's actually engaging the muscle fibers. So that's
Love that.
um, really a really important thing. So I'd like
Yeah.
to actually, a couple weeks, we're going to dive deeper into the reps, but I think it's important to help understand that. Another thing that we need to flesh out here a little bit is just rep ranges, because that always comes up. In order to get
Yeah.
close to failure safely, and I'm going to go
Yeah.
into rep ranges more detailed later in like another episode, but in order to get to failure safely, it's probably not wise. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's probably not wise to try to train in the 1 to 5 rep range for building muscle and getting going to absolute failure. Can you do that? Oh, absolutely. But it is
Sure.
very hard on your connective tissue.
Yeah.
It's very hard on your just systemic fatigue, axial fatigue. It's going to take you a lot longer to recover. And so for most of the literature, they say, hey, probably something above like 6 reps is good.
Yeah.
And depending on what muscle group that you're working, you can go up to as much as 30. I prefer like actually staying almost like at the 20, like between 6 and 20 rep range, because I feel like I'm heavy enough to really exhaust. Once I get past 20 and I just keep
Yeah.
going,
What
I
are you
just feel I
like?
just
What are you doing?
I just feel like, oh, I hate myself. I just feel this incredible burn. And it feels like it starts to move towards more muscular endurance as a
Right.
modality, as opposed to muscle hypertrophy. So, again, there's people that disagree with that. Certainly could build muscle if you did 3 sets of 100 reps. You could, but why?
Right.
But it's like, there's no reason to do that. And that takes a
There's not a
lot.
lot of science behind that it makes a big difference going for
Yes.
those higher rep ranges. And I think like that's one of the biggest things is like um we're not saying you can't. We're just saying you're it's not optimal. And by optimal, it's not like it's just literally essentially a waste of your time unless you really want to do it like that. Like if you
Yeah.
want to be able to bust out 100 reps and like that makes you feel king of the hill, go for it. But as far as making progress faster, it's not the the science coming back about that is very, very, very minimal.
Yes, yeah, and like,
Yeah.
do you really want to try to get between 4 reps in reserve to failure on 100 rep sets? It's
Yeah.
like how would you? It's hard to actually know. Like I would be honest with you, I'm a coach. I've been training for over 20 years, and I would
Mm-hmm.
probably struggle with like, am I really close to failure here? Because I probably could still
Mm-hmm.
do 20 more reps here, but it's just that there's so much lactic acid and blood and burn. It's like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So
That would be so unpleasant.
we'll get into the science of rep ranges later, but I think that kind of gives us that understanding of intensity. So you want to try to get as
Yep.
close to muscular failure as possible. And then there's techniques that could take you further, that we might develop too. Like, people will do drop sets. They'll
Yeah.
do uh, lengthen partial. So they'll do, like, if you're doing lat pull downs and you can't quite come all the way down to your chest, bringing
Yeah.
the bar down, but you're like, hey, I'm just going to come to the top of my head for a couple more reps after I've reached technical failure from full range of motion. But my
Yeah.
goodness, doing like 2 to 3 or 4 more reps in the lengthened partials, it just
It's
kills,
hard. Yeah.
a deeper level of failure than you would have gotten otherwise. Or
Yes.
with the drop set idea is when you go to technical failure, you no longer can do that exercise with good form. You lower the weight with little to no rest in between, and you do as many as you can again, and you can do another drop set. These are
Yep.
techniques that you can draw.
Drop sets are probably what got me the most amount of like muscle gains. When I
Yes.
was training with a friend of mine, and this is when I learned I was a new trainer and he was more seasoned than I, and he taught me about drop sets, and I had only ever read of them, but I started implementing them, and I was just like, oh, this makes a big difference. And like, even within just a few weeks of doing drop sets, I noticed muscular difference in my physique. So putting those into your training is a
Yes.
great plan. Um, Real quick, I want to talk about and just explain a little bit for somebody who might not know what muscular failure is or
Mm-hmm.
looks like. Let's kind of describe what muscular failure is um, before we move on to volume.
So typically, when you get to failure, and when you've heard me maybe say technical failure, it means
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I'm possessing good technique and I'm doing the exercise through that like full range of motion.
Right,
Unless you
how
have
it's
a
supposed to be
physical,
done.
injury that limits the range of motion, but it's
Right,
full range of motion as you can do.
right.
When you're doing the concentric part of the lift and you can't actually complete it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's and you might need someone to assist you, or if you're doing a machine, you just lower back down and you're done. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, I reached failure. I could
I
not bring that.
cannot move this muscle anymore.
Yeah, that's done. So and one of the ways that you know that you're actually reaching failure, um, you feel a huge disruption to the muscle afterwards.
Yes,
You get a huge pump, which is good. Um, but when you go back to do that exercise for a second or a third set, your performance will start to drop.
right.
In other words, if you think you got to failure and you hit 10, but the second set you also hit 10, and the third set you also hit 10, probably,
Probably didn't
um,
hit failure.
yeah, you probably didn't hit failure, because if you actually
Yeah,
did, it'll look more like something like 10, maybe second set 10, maybe, but it'll probably be more like 9. And then sometimes it could really drop off on the third set and be
it's
like,
like 6. I've
yeah,
had that happen so
yeah.
many times. I was like, I think this is not going to move anymore.
So when I
I
look at
rem
my,
I rem Go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking the first time I ever hit muscular failure, it was with a bicep curl, hilariously enough. I was doing a fairly intense program and I had never hit muscular failure before and I didn't know what it was and I didn't know what was happening. But I was doing a bicep curl and basically it was definitely not the last rep of whatever of the bicep curl. But like, I remember like starting to pull my arm up and like barely getting it to 90 degrees in like a bicep curl. And like my muscle just like stopped working. And I was just like, I almost dropped to the dumbbell and I kind of like let my arm down. And I was just like, is that what they talked about when they were talking about muscle failure? And I tried to lift it up again and I could not. And needless to say, like that was how I learned about like what muscular failure looked like. And thankfully it was with an arm exercise, because I feel like leg exercises are a little bit more scary when you have a muscular failure
Yes.
in leg exercises, depending on what you're doing. But basically, when you cannot get that full range of motion, or you get like an inch into that movement and you're like, your muscle just refuses to move, there you go, there's your failure. Take a
Yes.
rest.
Yes.
Yeah,
And you brought up a good point, because for those who are listening and you're new to training, it might take you a long while to actually get to failure with legs.
sure.
Um, and some exercise you may not actually go quite to failure, like barbell squats. Yeah, you probably
Don't
don't
go
want
to
to
failure.
ever. Yeah, it's the risk and reward ratio is not really that great. Like,
Yeah.
probably just get in the window. Like, okay, I probably could do one more. Um, and some people, they've learned to use a rack, like a safety rack, real well, and
Oh yeah.
they know how to bail and stuff like that. I get that, but that's still kind of risky. I would just wait till you get to like an intermediate advanced level. But generally speaking,
Yeah.
just do getting close to failure with squats is just hard work, and just put in that work, and you're going to see some good results. But don't be surprised if you feel like almost throwing up after you do uh,
Facts.
legs to failure. There's just nothing like it in the world. This is why everyone jokes about, like, you see like a picture of someone laying on the floor, like, just did leg day, or I'm trying to get out of the gym. All these jokes. It's real, folks. It's real.
It's very real. That's
So
very real.
let's jump to volume and frequency, just
Yes.
for time's sake here. Um, so we got intensity, approximation to failure. Just keep that in mind. And if you have any questions, those who are listening in, we'd love to hash this out in more detail if you need information there. On volume, volume has to do, just really short, volume typically has to do with adding additional sets.
Hmm.
That's usually the most simple way of thinking of it. If you want to be technical, though, when we talk about volume, we're talking about sets, repetitions, and the weight. So if I
Yeah.
go like 3 sets of 10 reps at 100 pounds, is 3,000 pounds of total volume.
Yeah.
You
It's
could nerd,
very simple math.
yeah, you could nerd out each week and say, like, every time, if you did 3 sets of 10, but you started moving up in weight, that overall
Yeah.
volume is getting bigger.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest ways that you can improve your volume, yes, you can go up in weight, you can go up in reps, but adding a whole nother set, you're adding a whole lot more volume.
Right.
And so that's why most people kind of reduce it to, like, hey, adding volume is going to be mainly accomplished through adding additional sets. And what's
Right.
interesting when it comes to muscle building, there's this big controversy over, like, is it intensity or is it like higher volume? So you have back when Arthur, I don't know if you know Arthur Jones, and
I
guys
don't.
like the Menser brothers, who and then Dorian Yates really made popular high intensity training. And basically, it would do maybe a warm up set or two, and then they would do one set, absolute muscular failure, just
Okay.
brutal, absolute failure. And then they go to the next exercise, only one set. They're like, all you need is one. You don't need to do additional sets. They go absolute
Okay.
failure. I actually trained like this for years. Like, I tried it out, and I did see an improvement because it taught me how to do intensity. But eventually, I hit this plateau, and started reading some more literature that suggests, like, yes, going to failure, learning that intensity is important, but
Right.
the literature is so clear on this. If you add volume after you've learned to work out really hard, it just you're always going to add more muscle.
Hmm.
More volume equals more muscle. And actually, there's no study that shows like an absolute cap to that volume. The thing that you have to consider, though, is, and there's a lot in the literature that talks about junk volume, which is basically volume that you add, but you're actually not working out hard enough to produce any type of growth. So let's just say, like, I'm working out for a long time and I'm tired.
Right.
Have you ever done a set where you didn't really go to failure, and you had probably like 5 reps in, and you'd be like, oh, I'm just tired. I don't want to do
Yeah.
anymore. And so that's kind of like, you might as well stop. That's just junk.
Right.
junk volume. But if you actually pushed yourself to muscular failure, even if you're tired, you're probably going to see some gains from that. Problem is that the more volume you do, the more fatigue you're going to accumulate, and
Right.
you can eventually outpace your programming to where now you're so sore, you come back to your workout and you're like, man, I'm supposed to do leg day today, but my legs are still crazy sore. That's an indication that you did too much volume for your current level of conditioning. You need to back your volume down, keep
Yeah.
the intensity up, and then eventually you could just, and it's a little bit of an experiment, just add a little bit more volume. Like, hey, I can keep up with this. Do that for a couple of weeks, add a
Yeah.
little bit more volume, but eventually you are going to personally find your cap for a muscle group. And I'll dive into this deeper, but I want you to chime in, Amber, on any thoughts here if you had on volume.
Yeah, I think volume is super crucial. I don't have much to add um, besides what you said. I know for myself, I've recently added a whole set to all of my exercises, and like for me, that was like the next level of challenge to take. I would typically do like 1 to 2 warm up sets depending on how heavy I lift. So like for squats, deadlifts, bench press, I'll probably do 2 warm ups and then 3 working sets. Um, but recently I just moved myself up to 4 working sets and keeping it a minimal rep range between 10 and 12. So nothing insane. And like this past week, I was sore for like 2 days after just adding that amount of volume. But my body was like, okay, yeah, like that's what we needed to stimulate more muscle growth. Like my body was
Mm-hmm.
clearly responding to it. So I think like um, just going along with what you said, that adding in a set versus adding in weight first can be a really, really great way to just like mix things up for yourself. And then looking at whether adding weight or adding repetitions is the next best step for you.
Yes. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
article. It was written by Pellin and colleagues. It's called the Resistance Training Dose Response.
Mm-hmm.
All these articles have these like really crazy meta regression exploration. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it can be hard to learn to read these studies. But
Yes.
the basic gist is like they're just trying to test volume dosage. And they
Mm-hmm.
said for volume and hypertrophy, they really haven't yet in the science discovered the ceiling, which I described. It just depends on your ability to recover and also different muscle groups. Like, for instance, like biceps, they heal up really quick. You could train biceps
Yeah.
probably 4 times a week. So somebody that says, man, my biceps are growing, like, how many times are you training them? Well, I train them with back once a week and I do 3 sets of 10. It's like, okay,
That's
well,
why.
have you tried 5 sets? Have you tried 6? What if you try to do 12 sets of biceps in a week? I guarantee you they're gonna grow their biceps.
Right.
And their side delts is another one. Like, you could probably train side delts like 5 times a week. They just do not get that exhausted, because when you
Yeah.
do shoulder press, it's mainly front delt. When you do any type of back pull, it's rear delt. Side delts is like lateral raises, but then it's hard to really lift really heavy. I mean, I've seen
Right.
some crazy guys doing like 80 pounds trying to do lateral raises out to the side. Probably not really smart even for those guys, by the way.
Yeah. I was just saying there does come a point that you're testing your muscle's ability to work at a certain weight that is going to lead to injury.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I would say for you listening in, master intensity first, and that might be 1 or 2 sets, working sets, and then you might add a third, and then later maybe add a fourth. I actually like to combine with my clients. We're moving up in intensity, and then about week 4, I start to add a little bit of volume in on certain core exercises, and on peak week, the intensity's high and the volume's high. So we're maxing out on both of these, but they
Mm-hmm.
have a deload after that, an intentional recovery time. So the
Yeah.
accumulation of fatigue that maybe surpasses what they could do to continue will be met with, oh, I get to relax on the beach type of thing. Well, maybe not entirely, but something like
Not
that.
not quite that much, but
But
yes. Yeah.
I pay for their vacation and everything. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone's like, hey, I want to sign up for this training thing.
I would say
Uh,
we would have so many clients if we paid for them to go on vacation every 4 weeks.
I'm not sure we would have a business though.
We wouldn't.
Trying to pay for all that.
We would
So
not.
this last thing I want to touch on this article is that it was
Yeah.
interesting. Volume and strength, the return, there's a sharper diminishing return for volume and strength because how much strength just really beats up on your body. You're lifting really heavy, especially if you're doing
Yes.
like three reps, 2 reps, 1 reps with really heavy weight. You really just want to do like just a couple of those really heavy sets a week, and you should see yourself progressing. You don't have to go crazy. I'm actually doing a power building session where I'm only doing like 1 to 2 really heavy sets a week, but I'm just
Hmm.
trying to increase the weight each time, increase the weight. But because I'm not doing a crazy amount of sets, it's saving my body, connective tissue, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm still seeing myself progress every single week. You don't have to go over crazy. Now, by the way, those who are professional powerlifters, obviously, they're going to be putting a lot of time into training. They are going to be
Yeah.
doing a lot of sets, but
They
they're
also mix in lower lower volume
dynamic days.
stuff.
Yep,
Right.
yep,
Yeah. Like
100%.
when you're actually getting trained properly for like competitions for powerlifting, like you have a combination because you cannot go heavy all the time
Yes,
without injury. Yeah,
yes. One thing that I
absolutely.
tried, I talked about for those listening in, just weaving my story in here. I did high intensity training, so that like
Hmm.
1 set to absolute failure. Then I read about how the Germans train. Have you ever seen like this weak German lifters? They're like totally massive. They probably don't outbeat the Russians, but there's German volume training,
Genetics.
and German volume training is like 10 sets of 10 on everything. Like whatever exercise you do, it's 10 sets of 10. And you ought to just give that a
I was
try
saying
sometime. Do a mesocycle with German volume
10
training.
sets of oh my. Okay, so I would have genetics on my side with that though,
Yeah, yeah.
because I am German, Russian, Irish.
Well, there you go.
So
I
what are
expect. Go ahead.
I would say it would. Are you German at all?
Best I could tell, I need to trace my genealogy better. I thought I was
Okay.
British. Um, did I just come across like a British snob just a little bit? No, just kidding. Don't answer that. But I think Beasley with a Z actually has Irish, so I got the Irish
Okay.
feel. For those who
Yeah.
were not watching, I did that little Irish fist pump thingy, whatever you call that.
Okay. We'll have to talk about genetics and how they play into muscle growth one of these days. But legitimately, genetics are a huge player. So that's the only reason I commented that I should actually try that, because genetically I would be predisposed that could be a very good way of training for me. I
Yeah,
might die in the process, but
yeah, we should. I'd love to talk to you about that more too. Just some of the
yeah,
things that they're finding. I tried that, and then have you ever heard of FST7 training? It's
no.
basically the same kind of idea, but you finish with like it's like a set or 7 sets of an exercise,
Okay.
and I actually like that better. Um, and I'll describe that more another time. But
Yeah.
it's a really good, fun way to finish training for sure. Let's jump
Yeah.
to the last point with frequency. So
Yes, I was gonna say
intensity,
let's talk about frequency, and then let's tie this together about
yeah,
how muscle gain looks different between men and women.
yeah. So you got intensity, approximation to failure for muscle building for hypertrophy.
Hmm.
Volume, the literature shows, yeah, if you did more volume, you're probably going to build more muscle, but you got to keep that um, in cadence with your fatigue management.
Yeah.
And I would just slowly amp up. Don't just say, "Hey, I'm going to try to go crazy with my volume since it's more muscle." Yeah, but you're gonna burn out. You're gonna end up hurt yourself. Do it slow. Start off with intensity and then build your volume. But make sure the intensity stays there, or it kind of lands in the bucket of junk volume.
Yeah.
Frequency is just the amount of time you train in a week. It's just figuring out like Am I going to do 3 training sessions, 4 training sessions, 5 training sessions? But also,
Right.
how many times am I going to train a muscle group? So the
Right.
classic bro can't talk bro split, got it out, is Monday is chest day, Tuesday's back day, blah blah, so on and so forth. Where you're working a muscle group really hard one time a week. That's
Right.
a great way to start. I remember kind of
Yes.
kind of cutting my teeth on that idea. You learn to train hard and just kind of annihilate a muscle group. It's fine. But the literature shows you probably will do better if you at least train all of your body, all of your muscles twice a week. I saw balloons on my screen. That was cool.
It's because you did this, and if your camera catches it, it does that.
Oh, wow. I feel special. So right now, most people would say it's optimal, especially for even for beginners, really. Like if you can have your workouts spaced out to where you're training everything through twice a week, that's great.
Yeah.
Now, you think about it though, if you have a classic push leg pull
Yeah.
setup, that means you have to be in the gym 6 times a week to
Yeah.
really work through things. And most people just don't have that. So I want to give this as a push. I don't think push leg pull is optimal for most people.
No,
I
even
think
I don't do push leg pull.
I did it for
I
years and I loved it, but I did do 6 days a week.
Right.
And that's obviously this is where we could talk about guys versus girls in training
Hmm.
a little bit too. But I think starting off either doing several full body workouts where
Hmm.
you're not training the same muscles every day, but it might be quad dominant one day for legs, and then you might be doing chest and shoulders, and then the next time it might be hamstring dominant, glute dominant for legs, and then you're training back, something like that.
Right.
But you're getting variation, but you're training your whole body through. This is actually really good. I recommend this a lot for beginners, or to do an upper body, lower body split each day. So you might do 4 sessions in a week, 2 upper
Yeah.
body, 2 lower body, and then just make sure that you're hitting everything, at least all the major muscle groups twice. And if you
Right.
have any lagging parts, you can kind of add in a little extra volume. But yeah, that's a great place to start. And last thing I'll say about this with frequency, when you advance in building muscle, you're going to have to begin to think not just in terms of I hit everything twice, but like, hey, if I'm going to get my shoulders bolder and bigger, I need to probably work my shoulders 3 times a week in
Yeah.
order for them to be built. So you put in your shoulders and then you build the rest of your workout. But that might mean that you might slowly put like a muscle group that's maybe advanced
Hmm.
on the back burner. So you're putting it on minimal volume to keep it its current size, just enough,
Right.
so that you can maximize another area. So this is called like a priority principle. You're prioritizing certain things. Starting out, I would say don't even worry about prioritizing things. Just all muscles twice a week, checking all the boxes. But
Right.
later, you're going to think about frequency differently. And if you really want to geek out about something, not necessary, but if you're really paying attention to detail, you're going to figure out like for quads, probably for most people, 2 training sessions for quads is all you can do to recover from. I,
Right.
I know some people do like, I'm going to squat every day for 30 days. But I'm guarantee you, and I'm sure they gain some size from that, but I guarantee you that they're going to have days where they're just not as heavy or not as intense. You
Right.
just can't. You can't go to muscular failure with squats every single day. It's just not going to work. You will die, or at least
You,
close,
or hurt a knee,
or
pull
wish
something in your
for
hip.
death.
Yeah, or
Sorry,
wish
gotcha.
for death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's probably enough for this episode. So
Yeah.
there's no universal optimal frequency, but experimentation is the key to finding what works best for you as an individual. Just figuring out like how many days a week can I work out. Well, that's going to be a
Hmm.
big factor of the style of workout that you're going to build. You're like,
Right.
man, I can only work
What
out
can you
twice a week.
commit to consistently?
If somebody says I can only work out twice a week, pretty much always going to say 2 full body workouts. You know,
Yeah, I
because
would
then
agree.
they'll be able to at least, even if it's not completely like twice hitting their full body through. that's going to
Mhm.
be really good. If they can do 3, it might be upper, lower, and then the last day might be a full day, type of a thing. But
Mhm.
there's different ways to kind of play that out. But I think that gives you enough for those who are listening in to kind of say what would work for you. So if you put
Yep.
it all together, you work out hard, try to push harder than last time, get to failure, um, slowly increase your volume, figure out your frequency, and just that alone, you just get to work. You're going to start to build some really good muscle. So let's end with tying this together, just talking about maybe a little bit of difference in approach for men and women, and we'll close this out.
Yeah.
Amber,
So just Amber. Yeah.
Amber.
Just to like pull this together so that women can understand um what this is looking like for them versus men. The basic science is all the same, right? So the volume, the frequency, the intensity, that's all the same. That's all basic muscular mechanics, recovery, and things like that. However, one thing you'll often see is, especially if you're working out with your significant other, um, or you watch like a guy have his journey in the gym, you're going to probably see his transformation happen faster. And like, why does this happen? Like, you're working out, like, for a fact you're in the gym as much as he is. You might even be doing the same workouts. Sometimes couples will often do the same workouts, but you're not seeing the same results. So one of the things I really want to press is that men and with women, we are physiologically different and hormonally different, which is why, though the basic science is the same, our body's responses are going to be different. And so for women, we have 1/10 of the amount of testosterone that men have. Testosterone is obviously the male hormone that is super crucial in not only like their sex and things like that, but they, did you just fix my spelling on
No,
the
I didn't.
computer?
No. You're
Uh,
fine. Did I mess you up? For
I
those
saw
listening in,
movement.
we shared the
We
same
shared notes.
notes.
Anyways, so for men, they're born with more muscle fibers and then 10 times the amount of testosterone that we have. So they are automatically going to have faster muscle growth and faster fat loss because testosterone is a huge player in losing fat. So as women, we are supposed to have higher amounts of body fat than men are. We carry life and we take care of children, and fat is a sustaining energy source. So we naturally hold higher amounts. So I just don't want women to be discouraged when they're going through their own journey and not getting results as quickly as men. But I want you to know that the basic science is all the same. So stick with it. You're not going to look like a man working out. You are going to still actually probably develop a more feminine figure the more you work out. And just know that your results are going to look different and the timeline is going to be different, but the science is the same.
Yes. So,
Yep.
um, for those who are just like, what are the exact numbers? Like, so the testosterone levels for men generally between 300 and 1,000. That's nanograms per deciliter, while women range much lower, typically 15 to 70 nanograms per deciliter. So that kind of gives you like an idea of those ranges, which is completely wild. But that's so good to know just because information like this helps set expectations well.
Yes. When we know what to expect, it's much easier to continue on forward in our journeys with health.
Yes. So is there anything else that you wanted to add by way of like age, genetics, or nutrition? Or you think we could probably touch on that in
I
future
think we
episodes?
can loop those things into a different podcast episode.
Yes. We are
Yes.
planning on talking like a couple weeks just to kind of give you a rundown. Or next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about load, repetitions, tempo, rest periods, exercise selection, um, the best exercises that you must try. So that was just clickbait. But variation in exercise, that's what we're going to talk about next week. And then later we're going to talk about progressive overload. We're going to talk about recovery, nutrition. So I think this is going to be like really a go-to for you, just to be able to say, I want to build muscle. How do I do it? We're going to be checking all those boxes to help you win in your muscle building. I almost want to switch to an Arnold Schwarzenegger voice. Get down. No, no. Amber is shaking her head.
Don't do
No.
it.
Maybe we should just go for more of like the muscular nerd type. Maybe that's more attractive. All right, we are
I don't
done,
even know.
everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys have a great
Yes.
day. Until next time.